Alrighty. So welcome everybody. Welcome. We are so happy to have you all here. We're so happy to have Daniel as well. He is a longtime friend of the Berets, of myself as well. So it's an honor to introduce him to you all. Um, he has done a lot of work when it comes to food sovereignty, as well as the personal connection that we have to the food that we are growing, as well as to hear the IE. I know that he loves the IE as much as we do as berets. So it's a really exciting moment for us to be able to share in this space with him and in this conversation. But without further ado, Daniel.
Buenos dias, everybody. Thank you all for signing up and for joining us this morning for this plática around food sovereignty. As Yahaira mentioned, yeah, I've been a long time resident of the Inland Empire. I actually was born in Mexico, and at the age of 6, we moved to Moreno Valley, and so this is where I've been for a very long time. And I went to school at UC Riverside, and so have really just kind of like stayed connected to this area for a long time, and now just kind of embarking in this journey of like discussions of food sovereignty and kind of what that looks like, and the practice of it too, and understanding how we get our communities to reach that level. And so I'm really excited. This is actually the first time that I'm speaking to folks outside of like my friend circle to around food sovereignty. And so I'm really, really excited to bring you all into this journey. And so I guess without further ado, I'll just jump right into to my little presentation, and feel free. I'm more than happy to take any questions or concerns as we go. There is going to be a point in the presentation where I ask for questions, but feel free to stop me, like say like, hey, I didn't understand this piece, or can you go over that again? And this is really just like a free flowing space, and so I hope you all feel welcome to have any questions and whatnot. So
I actually got a question.
Yeah, what's up?
So like speaking to your background, I don't know if you were going to get into this, but like, so what, how did you get into this subject, and like your experience and everything into it?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question, Dean. As an undergrad at UC Riverside, I actually got involved with a group of folks to develop an emergency food pantry on our campus. And so that's kind of how I got introduced into like food work and food security, right? And so within a year, right, of getting started, we were able to have our first food distribution, and develop right procedures for our pantry on campus. And so eventually, I graduated. I left for a little while, and then I came back to UCR as a professional staff to work more hands-on with the pantry. And so on and off, I've been there now working with the pantry for about 5 to 6 years. And then in 2019, I actually had the opportunity to go to UC Santa Cruz for 6 months and work there at a farm, right? And so it was like an apprenticeship program, and so we kind of learned everything from tending seeds, from seeds to the soil and soil health, and we did orchard care, and even just like kind of like how to get to market and sell some of your produce. And so since then, here at home, I've been now, actually this is my second season growing food here in my own backyard, and I'm not really like selling at the moment, really just kind of growing for my family and like immediate friends, right, who are interested in kind of like learning a little bit more. And so eventually, right through like the practice of like doing some food security work, and now with doing like my own gardening and farming, I've just kind of got to thinking of like what makes the most sense, right? And I've seen just like, especially with like the pandemic, and a lot of folks struggling, right, to meet their own needs. like what makes the most sense for our communities to avoid, like further hunger and like avoiding some of these major issues, right? That we see because of capitalism and just like in access to foods. And so I hope that kind of answered your question.
Yeah.
Any other questions or concerns before we kind of jump into it? Cool. Awesome. Well, I'm gonna do my best to like not bore you all. My voice is not the most exciting, but again, I'm happy to answer any questions as we go. And so yeah, welcome to our discussion today around food sovereignty. And let's see, here we go. And so some of the topics, right, that we're going to be talking about today are defining food sovereignty, especially in conjunction or in opposition to food security, and kind of what that means and what each system kind of provides. The value of diversity, especially as it pertains or it looks like in agriculture and in food production. The power of seeds, right, and why it's important to look after seeds, and then how do we persevere, right, and like how do we kind of develop the procedures for developing a food sovereign system, right, and food sovereign communities. And so I think one of the pieces, right, that I want to give before we jump into the conversation of food security versus food sovereignty is understanding that our communities have different ways of existence, right, and different food ways, and so food ways is really just like the production of food, right? Like how do we process food for our consumption, and like how are they made valuable to our communities and our cultures, right? And so in our fight, right, for food sovereignty and our struggle for that, we want to respect the dignity of our communities and rights to determine what is in the best interest for ourselves and for our communities, right? And so really the thing that brings me to this concept, right, or this respect for communities' rights is a particular community called the Comcac. And so the Comcac are a community of like hunter-gatherers kind of folks from Sonora. And so this community, like though they reside in areas that are close to like settlements or cities, right? They've taken the active approach of still maintaining the practices of their ancestors and collecting right food and fishing and hunting in the ways of their ancestors, right? And so even though the commodities, right, of the modern world are approaching and encroaching into their society, right? They've determined that it's within their best interest to practice the ways of their ancestors, right? And so understanding, right, that not everyone and not every community will find food sovereignty in the ways that we may find it, right? And so just understanding that it is their right as a community to have those that determination for themselves. And so that's just kind of like the first piece I wanted to bring up. And so now, we'll kind of get into food security, right? And so what does food security mean? And so food security really was kind of defined by the Food and Agricultural Organization of the United Nations, right? As existing when people can economically and physically meet their nutritional needs, right, on a daily basis to have an active lifestyle. And so really just like being able to access food, right, is kind of like the main approach. And so there's kind of like 4 dimensions, right, that the United Nations have set forth for food security. And so the 4 are accessibility, right? And so it's like, do you have a grocery store or a market, right, with full stock to meet your needs? Access, it's like how will you get there, and can you actually get to the grocery store, right? And so this is kind of alluding to folks with disabilities, right, or like older folks, right, who may need support and assistance. And so when you actually get there, are the foods available there, culturally relevant to you? And then one that that is overlooked very often is utilization, right? Is so like how will you actually prepare those foods? And so like folks can have a full kitchen, right, but still experience malnutrition, right? And so this is really understanding how do we pass on the knowledge of food and food production, right? Like how to make tamales, or like how to make tortillas, or like how do we prepare foods, right, to ensure that we're meeting our nutrition, not just as a generation, right, but passing it from generation to generation. And then stability, right? Like, can you meet your nutrition for the long term, right? And so, like, will you have to worry next week or next month about, going to the grocery store and not being able to find the things that you need? And so these are, how the United Nations have addressed some of like their approach to food security and meeting the needs of communities, right? But in for the sake of our conversation, I see that food security actually kind of falls short to meeting some of the demands, right, of our communities, not only here in the United States but across the world. And so understanding, right, that this can actually work for some communities, right, but it may not be what other communities need. And so in opposition, right, to food security, or in conjunction, right, food sovereignty was really, it's kind of like a new concept in a way, right? It was defined by La Via Campesina. And so La Via Campesina is it's like a coalition, right, of farmers of the global South, who saw, right, the encroachment of like neoliberal governments taking away land and resources from them, right? And so they sought to set kind of like a definition for how they wanted to take power back, to determine, right, their food, and how they control like the food production and food ways of their communities. And so the way that La Via Campesina defined it, right, is that food sovereignty is when peoples, countries, or state unions have the right to define their agricultural and food policies without any dumping vis-a-vis third countries, right? And so really what this means is that communities or countries, right, can prioritize their food resource within their community without intervention, right? Without other people messing with how their food is produced, or the pricing, right, of their foods, to protect their own communities, right? And so we'll talk a little bit about interventions later in the presentation, right? But this is just kind of like generally, this is how La Via Campesinas understood how food sovereignty works. And so there's 6 pillars, right, of food sovereignty that La Via Campesina has determined, and so we'll kind of jump through these a little bit. And so the first one that I want to tackle is food for the people, right? And growing food, and understanding that food is a right and not a privilege, right? And so growing food for sustenance and not for commodity, right? We're growing food to meet the nutritional needs and cultural needs of our communities, and not to like make a quick buck, right? We're not growing food to sell simply for to create more money, right? And so understanding that the focus of our food system should always be people and community members. The next pillar is the right of farmers and food providers value. And so oftentimes, right, especially here in the United States, farmers and farm workers tend to struggle with their own food security, right, and with their economic development, right. And so La Via Campesina has determined, right, that farm workers and farmers have the right to work and live in dignity without the market, right, setting a value for their work, right, and undermining their right to their life and to their work. The next pillar is localized food systems are prioritized before supplying large markets, right? And so this really kind of goes back to the first one, right? And understanding that the production of the food that is grown for a community should be for the community before it's exported, right? So if we have excess, right, if we have extra items that are grown, great, like let's sell those out to other communities that may need them, right? But first, we need to take care of the community that we have. This could be landless people, right? This could be community members who just aren't able to produce food for themselves for whatever reason, right? And so really prioritizing the local food system and the local people. Put control locally to determine prices and protect from low priced imports, right? And so an example here is that when NAFTA was signed, we'll talk a little bit about NAFTA in a bit, but when NAFTA was signed, between Mexico, Canada, and the United States, the US and Canada were able to sell really cheap corn to Mexico, right? And so like, where's the logic, right? Where like Mexico, the birthplace, right, of corn, is having to buy corn from the United States and Canada, but this caused a sinking in price, right? The price of corn just dropped, and so local farmers who grew diversified corn weren't able to compete, and so they had to leave. And so really giving local communities and local countries, right, rights to protect themselves from the drop in price for particular products. Building localized knowledge and participation for perpetualizing the efforts, right? And so really what this is just like a fancy way of saying, like, let's have more farmers. So one of the things that we're seeing here in the US is that the average age of a farmer now is about 65. So if you think about it, in the next 5 to 10 years, the majority of farmers are going to retire, leaving us with a huge void of people, of like the people who grew our food, right? And so it's going to create a huge crisis in the next few years of like where our food is coming from, who is growing our food, right? And so really the efforts here are to train younger people who are interested in food production, so that this knowledge that has been developed over generations can continue, right? And we can continue to have farmers, right? And because otherwise, then we have to revert to hunting and gathering and just like other things, right? And the last one that La Via Campesina has determined, right, is recognizing of women's farmers' rights and their major role in food waste, right? And understanding the role of women in food is a lot more important than than our patriarchal system kind of dictates it to be, right? And understanding that women just have a much bigger role, right, than we may understand in determining, right, the seeds that we grow, taking care of the land, and prioritizing, right, the where our food is going. And then one of the pillars that isn't really explicitly written out, but is kind of included in each of these different pillars, is taking care of the environment, right? And understanding that that for us to have a food sovereign system, right, it needs to also be sustainable. And so we need to ensure, right, that that as food is being produced and out in the fields and gardens, right, that it's also being sustained in a way that 5 years from now, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, right? Farmers then can continue to produce the food, right, to continue sustaining the community, especially now that we're starting to experience global climate change impacts, right? And so, why is it important to acknowledge the distinctions, right? And so we talked a little bit about it earlier today, right? Like what happened at the beginning of the pandemic. So, if you remember back to March of 2020, right? Those first few weeks of the pandemic, there were a lot of folks going out to grocery stores, right, and buying out taking shelves worth of food, right, that they maybe they needed, but maybe they didn't, right? And so this left a lot of very vulnerable people without fresh foods, fresh produce, essentials, rice, lentils, and whatnot. And so I remember back then, right, I had to have a conversation, right, with folks of like, hey, at the beginning of the month, trying not to go to the grocery store because WIC recipients, right, or food stamp and CalFresh recipients are going to get their money, and they haven't had it for the first few weeks of the pandemic, and so they haven't been able to stock up, right? And so really the issue, right, that we see at hand and why we're having this conversation is because the problem is poor distribution and allocation of food, right? So a lot of folks may think like, oh, well, it's because people are hungry, and this is true, right? A lot of people are hungry, right? But hunger is a symptom of like the poor distribution and poor infrastructure in our systems, right? And so a lot of corporations, or not as many corporations, right, have a lot of control and power to dictate what happens in local communities, right? Corporations are making decisions about what our food looks like, who can eat our food and who cannot. And so really the goal of food sovereignty is to move that power away from corporations and move it to the local communities, right? And so this is also to, I want to take a moment, right, to also acknowledge like food sovereignty sounds like, like a wonderland, right? And like we're going into paradise kind of thing, right? But food sovereignty takes a lot of work and a lot of like coordination and community buy-in. And so before, right, we can commit to being food sovereign, right, we need to educate our communities, right, about like what the impacts are and what are the things that are going on in our community in terms of like health, in terms of access to food, right, that we need to address, right, through our approach or our journey to being a food sovereign community, right? And so, so I know I just dropped like a whole bunch of definitions, a lot of concepts and thoughts, and so I want to take a moment, right, to see if anyone has any questions, concerns. I'm more than happy to go back to a different slide. But yeah, I just wanted to open up, this space to have this conversation to clarify anything that maybe I missed or wasn't clear about.
No, I'm just saying. I just want to say I'm loving it so far. So I'm getting. I like all the definitions and everything. It's cool.
Good. I'm glad. And one thing actually I do want to note, right? Like these are not my own personal ideas, right? This isn't something that I've like sat down and like created on my own, right? This is knowledge that has been passed down from a lot of like community leaders and previously, right? And you'll see that there's sources at the bottom of the pages, right, for where I pulled some of my information from, because this is not my own like my own knowledge, right? This is information that I've been able to gather from different places of people who are also doing this work.
I wanted to ask, I don't know if maybe you're going to get into it a little bit later in your presentation, but you talked about how we need to encourage younger folks to get into that farming like lifestyle, right? To familiarize themselves with how to work the land, how to harvest the fruit of the land, right? What is the first step towards doing that?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Yahaira. And definitely that's like a huge part of the conversation, right? Like, how do we train young people to be farmers, right? And I think um, the first question, right, or like the first piece that I would encourage younger folks to do is to ask questions, right? And a lot of people will say like, well, you just got to start growing food, and that is important too, right? Like you just have to jump into it and like grow food at your own house, right? Like in pots and in like cans and in the soil, wherever you can, right? Like this is a really great thing about food and seeds, right? Is like food, like seeds want to grow, and they'll, as long as you give them, like a little bit of care and water, right? They'll just grow because like they want to live, right? And so, but I think to really change the our mentality, right? I think um, younger folks should definitely like reach out to family members, right? A lot of us have family members who grew up in the fields, right, or like worked the land for a significant part of their lives, right, and like understanding like what their experiences were like, right, in my case, right, my grandpa from my mom's side worked the land, right, for the first 20 years of his life before he moved to Mexico City. And, oftentimes, like, I'll just ask him, like, oh, I'm growing this tomato, right, but it's looking like this. Like, what's your experience with kind of seeing some of these things? Or like asking him, right, like, what was it like, growing up and like having to wake up at like 3 4 in the morning and hit the fields to turn them and to like fertilize them, and or like how did you store the corn that you grew, right? And so a lot of it I think just has to do with like understanding the like our own histories, right, and like where our communities and our families come from. And I also want to acknowledge that like not everyone has that, right? Like not everyone has that opportunity to reach out to their families for various reasons, right? But I think for those of us who do, right, is definitely kind of taking that initiative to connect with our elders and family members who did grow up in like tending the land.
What about buying seeds and stuff? Like, where's a good place to buy seeds?
Okay, yeah, we can talk about buying seeds.
Yeah, it's a little specific, but I mean, just while you guys are talking about it, kind of,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so there's a few places that are really great to like source seeds from, right? The main one, right, and this is kind of like the most popular one, is Johnny's Seeds, right? And so Johnny's is like they grow exclusively like heirloom and organic seeds, right, that have not been genetically modified. And so we'll talk a little bit about GMOs in a bit, right? But so Johnny's is a really great source. The reason Johnny's is really great is because they have like a wide variety. They're a really big store, and so they have like a wide variety of seeds, and they're available basically like in the entire country, right? So a lot of farmers from Southern California up to like Oregon and Washington to like Florida and like the Northeast, right? They buy their seeds from Johnny's, and so it's a really great place because it's like they'll have like a wide variety, right? In terms of like smaller scale, right? I'm actually in the process of like getting in contact with a company called San Diego Seed Company, right? And so they're like a smaller scale organic seed company that is based out of San Diego. And so again, right, is really prioritizing the local economy, right? The local farmers, right? And so that to my understanding so far, right, like they're sourcing their seeds ethically, right, and are supporting the local community in that way. And then there's also like Native Seed Search, right? Like their approach, right, or like their kind of direction is really to create, right, a stock of like indigenous to like the Americas, right, seeds that are indigenous to the Americas, and kind of create that diversity of seeds. And so if you have the opportunity, right, to like purchase any seeds from them and kind of help them in their mission to grow, I think native seeds are just also a really great place to start. Oh, look at that. So Yael, I'm not sure if that's how to pronounce it, but they said they received seeds from Rob's Greenfield in the past. And so thank you so much for sharing that resource with our community today. Any other questions or concerns, thoughts, complaints? All right, great. So so now that we've kind of understood that piece, right? I want to move on to talking about some of the other parts, right, that are important to addressing and reaching food sovereignty for our communities. And so the first one is, as we were talking, right, is the power of seeds, right? And I don't know, I think of like as a young farmer, right, like I'm just like mystified by seeds. Like I just think they're so magical, right? And so for me, it's like almost like a religious experience, right? Seeing them grow. But I actually read an article a few years back where some archaeologists, I believe, they found some seeds that had been stored over 13,000 years ago, and they were still viable. So they were able to literally bring back this species of crop, right? I think it was like some sort of like watermelon or like a type of melon that people just simply weren't growing anymore. And so they literally brought back this crop back to life from 13,000 years ago. And so in proper storage, right, seeds can last years, decades, or again in this case, thousands of years, right? And so, but really, I think the main piece, right, that I want to get to with this is, so seeds have historically been like publicly owned, right? And so I put quotations on owned because like ownership is in the way that we understand it now is a very Western European kind of like mentality of it, right? Like where this is my private property, right? And so like I'm not going to get too much into that, right? But it's just like I want to give that disclosure, right? Like ownership in a sense is that the way that we understand it is very Western European, right? And so so really the like seeds have been seen as kind of like a public domain, right? Where I don't know if you're all familiar with like like what is one, like Moby Dick, or like pieces of literature or music, right, that are like publicly owned, like no one individual can can privately own this piece of knowledge or this piece of property, right? Like it's owned as by the culture as a whole. And so many indigenous communities saw seeds in this way, right? And not only did they like see it as like a not like ownership, but a public like a cultural obligation, right, to maintain and tend to these seeds, but they also saw them as like ancestors, right, as like family members who needed to be taken care of, right? So and so like seeds were manifesting themselves in a way to create sustenance, right, and continuing generations. And so like so really like the way that some communities, right, saw seeds is like these are my ancestors taking care of me now, right? Like this is the work that they did, they put in generations from now, so that I can have this knowledge to then take care of myself, and then I'm putting in the work to maintain these seeds, right, so that they can be passed on, right, to the future generations, right? And so I think, I don't know, this for me, I get like really excited about this because I think it's something that's very magical and very beautiful to like have seeds, right, that your community owns. And so talking about seed ownership, right, like this is kind of where we get into where things start to get really complicated. And so corporations, right, like Monsanto, I'm sure many of you have heard of this name, right? Monsanto have patented, right, various seeds, GMO seeds, right, the genetically modified seeds like corn, soy, and wheat. So these three, I think there's one more. It's like there's like 4 or 5 main crops that produce like 70% of all of the food, right, that is consumed in the world, both by humans and by animals, right? But so farmers who buy GMO seeds, like they have to buy seeds every single year. So that makes you like very vulnerable and makes you tied to that corporation, right? Where because now you're like every year you're not growing food for the sake of growing food and for the sake of your community, but to exchange like monetary goods between this corporation, right? Like you're at the will of a corporation. And so we've seen right in the past that like these GMO seeds are considered the private property of these corporations, and they like farmers have been prosecuted by the law because they've had seeds, right, that are like GMO seeds that are growing in their fields, whether they bought them or not, right? And so this is the way that I see it, is that this is a direct attack to like the genetic diversity of our crops, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a bit, but also the sovereignty of farmers, right, to determine what crops they're growing, what food that they're creating for their communities and the communities, right, that rely on the knowledge and the expertise of farmers. And so, so really, like when you're buying like GMO seeds, you're buying kind of like the right to grow that seed, but that doesn't give like that buying that seed doesn't give you the right to then reproduce it because it's the private property of that corporation. Does that make sense for folks? Right, so it's really like seed ownership is very complicated, and I believe that it's like morally bankrupt, right, or morally incorrect to own seeds because this is like the sustenance, right, for our communities. And then so why is it right an attack? Why are GMOs an attack to the genetic diversity, right? And so farmers, right, will get together every year to exchange seeds, right? So say like you live in a community, right, where like beans are really important, right? And so farmers will grow fields of beans, right? And so at the end of the season, right, or right before you're gonna get to crop again, right, you'll get together with your farmer friends, right, and exchange seeds, right? This will help, mix in all that genetic diversity between that, this particular crop, so that it's protected, right, from major diseases, from pests, right, and from crop collapse, right? And so, so one of the things that I'm thinking about right now is like, like stray dogs, right? A lot of folks, right, they're always after like a purebred dog, right? And they're like, oh, like purebred dogs are the most beautiful dogs, right? And I want to have a purebred dog because it's just like beautiful to have, right? But purebred dogs, if you notice or if you know, right, tend to have a lot of like medical issues, especially as they get older, right? But if you find a stray dog, right, like the stray dogs will never get sick. Well, I mean, not never, right? But because like of the mixing of their genetic diversity, right, like their genetics between different dogs, right, like they're kind of in a way protected, right, from a lot of these diseases or problems, right, that purebred dogs will experience. And so the same happens with seeds, right? Like you want to diversify, the genetic pool for seeds so that you're not having these issues that monocultures, right? Like farmers who only grow one variety of foods, right? And so so really, I mean, this should really just be known as like the diversity section, right? It's like you want to grow not only one type of crop, right, but you want to grow a variety of them and be able to exchange, seeds with folks so that every year your seeds stay strong. And so And so actually one of the perks, right, of also like seed ownership as like a community is that crops are grown to the needs of the community and not for the need of a market, right? And so like think back to the last time that you like bit into an apple or like had like a grape, right? Like did it taste good, right? Like did it like genuinely like you're like, oh, like this is really delicious. This was a really delicious apple, right? Or this was a really delicious grape, right? A lot of times, right, like with industrial agriculture, like they're growing food not for really like the consumption aspect, but for the transportation, right? So food is getting moved from like the Central Valley down to Southern California or out to the East Coast in New York or out to like Texas or Florida, right? And so they're not really looking for a crop that tastes good, but a crop that can withstand the travel. And so when you have a localized food system, right, you can grow food to the needs of your community rather than just for the transportation aspect. And so one of the things that this actually brings up and what I wanted to talk about here is there's a farmer out in the Bay Area. They're an Asian American farmer who grows different types of peppers and like cabbage, right? And like a kimchi type of cabbage. And so what they do is actually every year after like they grow these things, they go to a women's shelter for like an Asian American women's shelter, and there are a group of Korean women, right, who have the knowledge of like kimchi making, right? And so what they do is they get together and they make different types of kimchis with the food that this farmer has grown, and they do basically like testing, right? Like they taste the kimchi, right, for like acidity, right, or bitterness, or whatever different categories, right, there are for kimchis, and these women then give this feedback to the farmer, so the farmer can then next year grow the variety or the crops that were like most flavorful or like had like the right characteristics for these women, right? And like these Korean women who have this deep knowledge of kimchi, right? And so so just think of the possibilities, right, of like growing corn, right, specifically for like pozole, or growing corn specifically for tortillas, right, or chiles, right, for I was just talking to Jair about aguachiles, right, that I made yesterday, right, like growing crops specifically for a specific food production or like a specific food, right, I think is really where we start to center ourselves as individuals and as people in our food system. And so I know that was quite a bit. Did that kind of like make sense, or did I kind of lose you all on? Yeah. Okay, cool. All right. And so, why grow our own food, right? Like, and how do we resist, right? So like the reasons why, we would grow our own food, right, is to safeguard, right, the culinary values of our communities. And again, right, like I said, right, we, like it's really important, right, that we have the rights to determine like the foods that we grow, right, and growing food specifically for our very own needs, rather than having a corporation make those decisions, not only for our community, but for a community that is thousands of miles away, right? Where like their priorities are going to be very, very different. Reducing the medical needs, right? And so what I thought about here was, like when my mom used to tell me that todo lo bueno está en el caldo, right? Like I would, eat like the sopa itself, right? But leave the caldo. And so like, understanding that food is our medicine, right? And for our communities, right, to address the issues of like diabetes and hypertension, right? And like all of these medical issues that we've been experiencing, right? It's really important to understand that, if we prioritize, the foods that we're growing, and that we're being intentional about our food production, right? Then we're going to address, a lot of these medical issues, right, that we've been experiencing without the need of needing to go to, like specialists and doctors and the dialysis center, right? And so, this is one of the major points, right, of like why we need to grow our own foods. Democratizing the food production, right, is again, making sure that we are the ones that are making the decisions about our foods and where it's coming from, who is going to be able to consume these foods, rather than, again, having a corporation tell us or a central government tell us what it is, what's good for our own interests, right? And then, of course, protecting and tending the land and the water for environmental conservation, right? And so one of the things that I challenge, some of my students at work is like thinking about, like, when was the last time you ate a banana, right? And like, does it make sense here in Southern California to be eating bananas, right? Or does it make sense, to eat, like all these super tropical fruits, right? Like, where is this food coming from, right? And so understanding that our environment has limitations for a reason, right? And kind of like living within the means of the environment to ensure that, again, 100 years from now, generations from now, we, our descendants can look back to and think like, well, thanks to our ancestors, right? We're able to continue producing the foods that we eat. And then finally, right, to being a good ancestor. And again, right, and making sure that the land is being taken care of, the foods that we're growing and that we're consuming are being taken care of, and that we're also taking care of each other, right, is really, I think the huge takeaway is that, the food that we grow is part of our system, right? But like, how are we taking care of each other? How are we taking care of the food so that everyone in our community is eating, right, the foods that they need? And so with that, that's kind of it. And well, I guess, I mean, the last part, right, is like, how do we resist, right? Or like, how do we create our local food system, right? And so like the first part, right, is like growing, like just start growing things, like, go to the grocery store, like buy packets of seeds. There's a lot of times they're really, really cheap, right? You can get seed packets for like $1. And just like get a tiny pot, or like la olla de tu mamá that, she doesn't use anymore, like put some dirt in there, put some water in there, and just like let it grow, right? And just start experimenting, I think is really kind of like the first step, right? And then next is talking to family members, right, community members, to like get the knowledge, right, that exists already, so that they can help you with that project. And then eventually, right, like this will start to magnify itself, and your community is going to then think like, oh, well, like Daniel is growing, jitomates over there. Like, maybe I can grow some epazote, and then Maria can grow, some frijoles, and then, at the end of the season, we can all come together and exchange food, right? And so it doesn't have to be something big. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to like, drop off the face of the earth and disconnect, right, from society as a whole, right? It's really just getting started and starting to think critically about, where your food is coming from. And I wanted to, like this piece here, like this question, I wanted to be intentional about also opening it up to you all, right? Like, what are ways that that you can see yourself like resisting, right? Or taking that step to reaching, food sovereignty for yourself and for your community. And so I'm opening up the space for you all to kind of just run wild and you know, provide some ideas, not only for your, like all the folks who are here, but also for myself, because I don't have all the answers.
Well, not to like turn the question back on you, but like, so besides growing, besides like, let's say you don't have access to space to grow or anything like that in your house. So like, what's other things that you can do to, I don't know, strengthen the network?
Yeah, I mean, one of the, I mean, the biggest part, right, is creating that network, right? Connecting with other folks who have that access, right? Who, like, maybe have a little plot or, and seeing like, hey, like, is this something that you're interested in doing in collaboration with me, right? Like, can we connect over this? And and that's, you know, essentially starting that network, right, with friends and colleagues. Or, you know, if right now maybe, yeah, like maybe you don't have the land, right, but you have the seeds. It's like who can I connect with to then making sure that you know, we can start something together. That could be a community garden, that could be like your own private garden, right? But it's like developing those networks, I think is really, really important. Because at the end, right, like you're going, like I mentioned before, right, you're gonna need the community buy-in. And so like it's better to start, right, like with your local community and seeing if that is something that is of interest to them. And if not, then it's like, okay, well, you know, like maybe I need to do a little bit more work with myself, right, so that it's like they can see that vision as well, right, and seeing the value in this project.
Yeah.
I don't know if that really answered your question or if that was too theoretical.
No, that makes sense, because, you know, like you say, if you don't have the space, then you can help somebody with the space that they have, and then you get something out of it, they get something out of it. You know, it's that community exchange.
Yeah. And so actually one thing that, as you were mentioning that too, I've seen farmers, right, who are growing, like some farmers who have businesses, right, they start growing food in their closets, right, like I'm not necessarily telling you like that's what you have to do, right, but like that is a possibility, right, is like figuring out like, okay, like do I need grow lights, right, or like can I afford grow lights, right, or like do I need a rack or like a little table to start growing like some greens, like something small, right, like I said, you don't have to have like, you know, 30 acres, right, because you know you want to start growing for everybody, right, it's like really just experimenting with the process, right, like for many of us, right, in elementary school, like we grew that little bean in the cup and we saw it grow and stuff, right, it's like it's reigniting kind of that part of our brain to getting things started. Any other comments like regarding the question, like how do we resist? How do we expand, right, our capacity as a community?
I would say bringing back all the ways like bartering. Maybe maybe your neighbor has nopales and you have limones, and that bringing back that exchange between community where everyone they give back, so like they have access, an example like the nopales, bringing back those old ways and bringing conciencia to building community through gardening and food.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think just the exchange aspect, right, I think is when most people will be more committed, right, and seeing that like, oh, you know, I grew these things, right, and but my neighbor has these things that I don't have, and so like how do we exchange it? And so like now I have, you know, these like in Daniel's example, right, like like now I have limones, right, even though I don't have a limon tree. I think is really important to also build a network, right, um, and create that community consciousness, right, of the exchange rather than you know we're gonna make money out of what we're growing.
I have another question. Sorry to interrupt anybody. But given that you were at UCR for a bit, what was kind of your understanding of the local? Because I know there was some things going on in the east side as far as, trying to get that area kind of on that type of understanding of where they were self-sustainable regarding their food and stuff like that. I think stuff like the Heal Zone, and I might have been touching on that. So were you involved in any of that, or what's your kind of your understanding of Riverside, where you were at, and this food sovereignty issue?
Yeah, so I am familiar a little bit with the Heal Zone and kind of like their approach, and I think one, I think it was like a noble idea, right, of like ensuring that community members have access to grocery stores, right, or to like some level of produce, right. But again, I think just like the conversation, right, of like food security, it kind of falls short, right? It falls short of really making that systemic change, right, for this particular community, because right there, like the goal was like, okay, like how do we get you looped into the network of our, of our grocery stores, rather like than like how do we empower this community, right, to have the knowledge to grow, or like have the space or the resources to grow their own food, right, rather than relying on the one or two market stores, right, that exists. And so I think it was set with good intentions, right, but I think it fell short of like actually creating the change, right, that was necessary for this particular community. And as someone also like who's not part of that community, right, like it could have been like it could look very different, right. And like so I don't want to also assume that it didn't necessarily work, right. But like as someone who kind of does or is kind of like in that vision of this work, right, I like that was my understanding, and like how I saw how it was all like developing on the ground for the east side. Yeah. And I mean the east side, right, like there's there's plots, right, and there's like areas to grow, right, but it's like is the city interested or willing, right, to make these resources available, like these spaces available for community members to then take a lead and do what is best for themselves, rather than interjecting, right, or having like the local government always like over the shoulders of folks, right. Oh, I don't think we can hear you, but I always have this issue. This is a challenge with being online all the time, is sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And so we just kind of roll with the punches.
It should be on the bottom. Like if you may just need to bring your cursor down to the bottom. It might show mute and unmute, or on the top.
You might want to also click the little arrow to select the microphone that you're using. So that for me, like that's always the issue. It's like my computer microphone, it does not work well, so I have to use an external one. And so
that's why I'm on phone.
Does anyone else have any comments, questions, concerns, complaints? Well, Yvette figures that out.
Do you have any tips on composting?
I love compost. Compost is the best. So there's, I don't know, like some people get really, really scientific with like compost, like you have to have 30% of this and like 60% of that. And really, I think what it comes down to is always just like, water, air, greens, and browns, right? And so that's the simple formula, right? And so your greens, right, will that's okay. So the browns, right? The browns are like your cardboards, like your without any tape or plastics, right? Any like tree branches, right, that you can cut up into smaller pieces, or really something like that's woody, right? Something that has like some sort of structure. Your greens can be like grass clippings, or if you like leaves that have just recently fallen, right, from your tree, like you can put it all together. And so there is like a lot of folks do say like, oh, for every one, you have to have, 3 of these. And so generally you want to have a little bit more greens. And so the reason why you want to have a little bit more greens is because the browns are kind of like the fuel, right? Like it's what's being consumed. But the greens are kind of like your spark, right? It's what creates the heat. And so you want to what you do is you kind of like put them up in layers, so that one on top of the other, so that it creates, right, like the compost throughout like the entire piece, rather than just like one big pile of green, one big pile of brown, right? Like, because that's not like, it's not well mixed in there, and so it's not gonna start. I can go ahead and I can send you some resources that could be helpful if you're like doing it from home. Worms are also really great to help you with composting, but you have to like find the worms and like put them in and like make sure that you don't get lost. So vermicomposting is something else, but and then water, right? So you want to make sure that it's moist, but it's not like drenched. And then the air is what's providing the oxygen, so that the process, right, of composting can continue to happen. And so usually what happens is like you'll put your pile of compost, right, and then you'll leave it there for maybe like a few weeks, 2 to 3 weeks, and then you'll like break it apart and mix it in again, so that it'll keep that process of composting going, right? And so yeah, that like, just to simplify the process, right, that's just kind of how it looks like. But it can get very, very technical, and so I'm not gonna jump right into that, because it's some people, it's just like ridiculous, the level of I guess like rules that they have for it. But compost is great. I love compost, and it's, a lot of people consider it black gold, and I think that's true.
Thank you. I was asking because where I live, there's a lot of rocks in the dirt. So my mom said, "Oh, we should start a compost," and we did, but we're missing the browns.
So like the browns is like, it could just be cardboard, right? Like you could get like Amazon boxes, or like if you have like sheets of paper, right, from like your schoolwork, or from like the mail, like you could chop it up into pieces and like throw that in, like scatter it in. Again, you want to have like maybe like I'd say probably like 2 inches, right, of like browns, and maybe like 3 inches of green, right? And so like just mix it up. If you're going to use grass clippings, I also encourage you to use like leaves to break it up, because if you put too much like grass all together, it gets all clumped up, and like it doesn't get wet really well. And so like then your compost pile fails, right? And so you want to like make sure that it's like all well mixed in there. But yeah, so like do like 2 inches, right? 2 inches, 3 inches, 2 inches, 3 inches, 2 inches, 3 inches. And as you're layering it up, make sure that you're wetting it really well, so that it starts that process of composting. And some people will actually also use for their like nitrogen, right, or like the greens, like to kickstart the process. They'll use manure, right, like cow manure or chicken manure, which you can get from like Lowe's or Home Depot, and that's really great. But I have found that it's not like necessary for every case, right? And so and then if like you're not in need of the compost like right now, like naturally the compost will occur, and you can leave it there for like say like a year, and it'll kind of go through its own process, right? As long as you're like keeping it moist and like doing the whole mixing and whatnot.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, can y'all hear me now?
Yes.
Okay,
Welcome.
so finally. So what I was gonna say about like the space, I know one time I tried just like germinating, like do you remember like in kindergarten, you put the little Ziploc baggie with the paper towel inside and like germinating seeds, and then I tried transferring them into an egg carton. That way then you could just plant them in the soil. And that in itself is a challenge, trying to get used to like getting them to germinate and then transferring them into the soil and then actually transferring them outside. It's a whole ordeal. So I think that's probably, I thought it was a good starting point for me, was to just get the seeds to germinate and then transferring them to soil. And because if you don't have a lot of space, putting seeds in soil, some may germinate, some may not, and it's kind of hard. You don't know which ones are going to. So it's kind of like you're just hoping they'll germinate. But this way you can kind of see, and it looks really cool because it's a lot of seeds will germinate in the paper towel. And then you transfer them, and then it just kind of starts getting smaller and smaller. So I think that's a good starting phase, or even like trying to see what plants you can grow inside. Like I know a lot of people will chop the top of their lettuce or their I forgot the name. Cebollas, or like I forgot the other word. Appios.
Celery is also one, right? Yeah.
You put them in water, and then just seeing what you can grow inside your house, and then starting there, and I think that's the way. Then now you have celery, you have lettuce at your house all the time. So those are ways to kind of think you can baby steps into the space that you have, and using that as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, those are all really great topics, and yeah, like whatever you can start inside your house, especially right now, right? Like it's late February and it's still kind of cold, right? And so sometimes like pepper seeds, right? Pepper seeds are like I'm not gonna say they're really difficult to grow. They're just very peculiar. They're very picky. And so if it's too wet, right, like they could die. If it's like too cold, they could die. And so maybe you want like, you want to start out with like pumpkin seeds, right? Or something that's a little simpler, right? So that you get in the process of like understanding like, oh, like this is how it goes, right? And as you start developing your knowledge, right, you can move on to things that are a little more challenging. And so I still have issues with peppers. Right now I have some in my greenhouse, and it's been almost 2 weeks and I still don't see anything. And so, it's just kind of like that's how it goes with gardening. You're hoping, right? You're praying to the gods, right, that it's gonna work. All right. So I guess just so we can get this so it's so Dean is asking if you did a live composting video. Yeah, I think that's more of a question for Daniel. But I guess just to kind of get stuff wrapped up a little bit, one of the things that actually I mentioned to Yahaira is that I would like to gift folks seeds, right? And it's like, so I'm gonna do, so what I'm gonna do is like pack 5 of my favorite seeds to grow, and mail them to you all. And so if you're interested in receiving seeds, this is kind of like my gift to you all to get you all started in your own journey of growing your foods. And so if you're interested, make sure that you send us your address and your name, right, and how you want us to kind of address it. And I will personally be sending you all like my 5 favorite seeds, and I'll also give you all like my email and stuff. So if you have any questions about like how to get them to grow or whatnot, or if they just don't grow, I'm more than happy to kind of like replace them as well. And so so go ahead and email us. Yahara, is that fine if they email you, or if you can email me too?
They can email the same email address that they use to RSVP. So that's just Inland Empire Brown Berets. And I'll put it in the chat. And then just give us your information. So like your address, your name, and then anything that we need to know, like to be able to send those seeds to you.
Yeah, thank you, Yahida. Yeah, so go ahead and send it to, if you are interested, send your address to that email. And in the next few weeks, you will be receiving a packet of my personal favorite seeds to grow here in the Inland Empire. And that, I guess that just kind of concludes at least the presentation. So I'm more than happy to stick around for a few more minutes if folks want to still chat, or if folks have any questions about anything that we covered. But yeah, thank you all so much for joining us today, and thank you again to the Berets for hosting me in this presentation. I'm again very grateful for this space and for you all for joining us today.
Thank you, Daniel. It was a great presentation. I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniel. We really
and I hope that in the future we can all meet in person.
Yeah.
Sorry, Yahida, go ahead.
Oh no, I just said thank you. We appreciate you.
Yeah, it was great.
Thank you.